Irish Nation, Notre Dame got a big top 15 win yesterday at home, beating Louisville 31-24. Many were calling it a must-win game. I'm my co-host Brett. He's out of town this week. He's actually in Europe. He did watch the game in Rome at a bar. I think it was at a bar that I recommended to him. I'll have to double check and make sure he actually went with my recommendation. But he'll be back next week. I'm actually going out of town the next 2 weeks. So you'll have Brett and probably some combination of guest hosts. For this week, I actually brought in a really good friend of mine, one of my best friends over, like since we were probably like 10 years old, Paul Farrat, lifelong Notre Dame fan, longer Notre Dame fan than me, actually. I didn't become a Notre Dame fan until I went to school there, but Paul's been he's been a fan through many a dark year. Unfortunately, I used to, before I became a Notre Dame fan, I actually used to make fun of make fun of his Notre Dame fandom when they would have rough stretches. Now I kind of look back on that and I'm like, well, okay, I'm like, I guess that maybe I was able to miss out on some of those moments and enjoy things forward from the BK era onward. But anyways, Paul, how was your game watch? How was your college football Saturday?
That was pretty good. Appreciate you having me on. Long time listener, first time caller, I guess, technically.
Yeah.
And I'll get ahead of this too. I've been sick the last few days, so I know my voice is not the most radio specific voice of all time anyway, but that's why I sound raspy. I know Brett has had his moments too after games, so listeners should be used to it, but I'm on the other side of a sickness here, but the games were good. Obviously, focus was the Irish game, which we'll get to as always. But Ole Miss was a good game. Obviously, the Bama Georgia game was a good one last night.
Yep.
Um, and then USC, I really thought USC was going to go down there for a minute, but
Yeah.
they sorted it out. But it was good. Perfect day to be sick. If you're going to have a day to be sick, I just sat on the couch and watched football all day. So.
Yeah. And Paul, from my perspective, your voice definitely sounds better than Brett has many times. We talked about that last week. Brett usually, after he attends any game, his voice is completely gone for about a week. Yours, honestly didn't even, I wouldn't have known you were sick if you didn't say anything. So I think we're starting out at a good point there already. Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a great slate of games. Notre Dame game, obviously, we'll talk about that more. But that was obviously entertaining. Bama, Georgia. I actually went to this venue in Los Angeles called Cosm. It's pretty interesting. It's very similar to the Sphere in Vegas. It's like a mini version of that, but it's kind of you have this massive screen that wraps around it. It really emulates as closely as possible what it would be like to be at the game. It gives you these views that are like you're up in the press box, or if they're near the goal line, they'll give you like a goal line view. Really cool. I actually posted about it on social media, and most people knew that it was not actually at the game, but I actually had a handful of people who DM'd me and they're like, "Oh shoot, dude, you were actually at the game." So apparently realistic enough to trick people. It was funny. I did think that it would be quite a flex if I just randomly went to that Bama Georgia game on a random Saturday, even though I'm not a fan of either. But
Out
yeah,
of nowhere. I did double take when I saw that too. Now, ordinarily on a regular non-sick Saturday, I would have been a few beers in and I might have been fooled. But it
yeah,
looked kind of like an IMAX, but for football, sort of. Is that a
yeah.
fair explanation? It looked
It's
very
yeah,
cool.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely similar to that, like a more expanded IMAX version. I think, it's a little pricey, but I wanted to try it out. If Notre Dame has a big playoff game and I'm not able to say they're playing at home and I'm not able to go, I would definitely consider going to this again. And it's pretty new, so they have some kinks to work out. Like the food took like 40 minutes for some like loaded cheese fries, which I guess maybe mirrors the experience of waiting in line for concessions. And then
Yeah,
it took forever to
exactly.
get out of the parking garage. But overall, it was really cool, so I would highly recommend it. But anyway, so with that, today we're going to talk about the Louisville game. That'll be the focus for the show, and then we're going to do a short segment on an announcement with Notre Dame's NIL collective. So basically, our old NIL collective fund is going away. We have a new one called Rally. We'll get into what that means. Should be a shorter segment. It's a pretty straightforward. The takeaways are pretty straightforward overall for that. Yeah, and then I think part of the reason it's shorter is we have a bye week. So Charlie Weiss cheeseburger week. That's what a lot of people call it. So we don't have an opponent to preview for next week. So with that, let's dive into Louisville. And Paul, I'm going to start with the offense here. I think for me, they obviously still remain the biggest concern on the team. We scored 31 points, but I don't think that paints necessarily the full picture. Granted, Louisville has a top 20 defense, but definitely a mixed performance from my perspective. I'm curious what I guess like what your high level takeaways were kind of watching this game.
Yeah, I think, and I should clarify too. Yeah, I'll be discussing mostly on vibes here. I know the analytics are always a focus here on the podcast, and I understand them well enough, but I'm not going to pretend to wow anybody with my statistical analysis here. But as
Yeah,
someone who's watched the games all year, I'm sure everyone feels the same way. You're kind of just waiting for the offense to feel comfortable at any point, and that first drive was the one that was the first time I'd throw out. I think they may just be a bad team, but
yeah,
that was the first drive against a good opponent where I felt like the offense was doing football things for the first time.
yeah,
And then obviously it slowed down after that. But I just think it's so clear that when the defense has to defend Leonard running and he can also throw and complete passes, which he was doing at the beginning, you
yeah,
can see the vision, so to speak. And that was promising. And then Louisville made adjustments, and I don't know that there was another counter until the very
yeah.
end. But that was at least promising. That it showed there was a possibility there of success, um, at least on that first drive. I know that's a very low bar, but it was an important drive in my mind.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was my and so that's why it's a mixed bag because we had those flashes of promise that we haven't really seen all year. I mean, I'll throw out some of the stats that I dug into because I think the way I approach this is I will watch the game, I will have certain impressions, and then I will go like look and see if the data matches it up. And this was a really interesting game because it matched up what I thought I would see, which doesn't always happen. So unsurprisingly, in that first quarter, we had a 66% rate on offense, which is stellar. If you're 45%, that's good. Top offenses in the country, they're high 40s, maybe around 50. So basically, we were just moving the ball downfield, chugging along. They were having a lot of trouble just stopping us on every down, and we scored 21 points. Some of these were aided by turnovers, but we capitalized on those turnovers. So we were just very efficient. And I think what was great to see here, though, uh, it wasn't just the running game. It was we were pretty effective in all aspects of the game. So Riley Leonard, he was looking good passing the ball. We also had some effective QB runs, and then even when we were handing off the ball, that was pretty effective as well. So for me, that was the big takeaway. Obviously, after that first quarter, things got a little spotty. We did have one more good drive in the fourth quarter, and it's interesting. One thing that I kind of noticed was it seemed like in the middle of the game, so call it most of the second and third quarter, and a lot of the fourth, we it didn't seem like we were calling as many of those Riley Leonard QB runs. And look, I think part of that was because he was banged up,
Yeah,
um,
I
and
agree.
and on top of that, we had a lead, so I think we also started playing it a little conservatively. But yeah, I mean, there's this gap where the offense just completely shut down. Now we responded in the fourth quarter. We had a nice 75-yard drive that gave us some much needed cushion. And I think in that drive, it was good to see that we were able to find that after having a stretch where we didn't play well. I thought it was excellent play calling. We had that 34-yard pass to Harrison where, I mean, we essentially just deceived the Louisville defenders. Like they both kind of we ran a rub route and the two guys stuck with the one guy, and then Harrison got open. And granted, it wasn't the greatest pass of all time by Leonard. He threw it a little short, but the play call was so effective. Harrison was wide open, and then we followed that up with a just beautifully executed screen pass to Jeremiah Love for 32 yards. So for me, those are the positive takeaways. I thought those were the flashes on offense that looked really good. Riley Leonard also had two passing touchdowns. We finally saw a little bit more of that downfield passing that we saw a little bit of last week and that we'd been sorely missing for most of the season. But those for me, those are the high level takeaways. If you look at the good, you also have to look at the bad. And I hinted at the middle two quarters and then most of the fourth where things weren't as good. So Paul, what were you feeling during those middle quarters where our offense just bogged down?
Yeah, it started to feel a lot like the middle of the NIU game a little bit again, and parts of the A&M game. And
Yeah.
some of my thoughts are probably not shareable on the podcast when
Yeah.
it was Price. Price was the one that fumbled, right?
Yeah.
Um, and it's just I do think you mentioned Leonard got banged up a little bit, and I think that's a big piece of it is that in order to open everything else up, he has to be able to run. And just like in the NIU game, they stopped running him. But I think in both cases, they were worried that he got banged up again. I know he said it was just the wind got knocked out of him because that huge lineman fell on him. But
Yeah.
I think so much hinges on him both being healthy and being able to run the ball. And those two things, the way he runs, he sticks his head in there. I think you're just worried he's going to get hurt all the time. It's not that he's fragile necessarily, but
Yeah.
they need him to run so much. And I don't know. And as you referenced, Louisville made a good adjustment. They were aggressive, and because Leonard may have been banged up, Denbrock pivoted again, and he clearly had those play calls lined up, but he needed to wait until the right time because
Yeah.
they were so aggressive. But if he had waited one moment too long, they might have lost the game. But the problem is, I don't know that there's a plan B because I don't know they can just air it out every play.
Yeah.
And if Leonard isn't going to run, he's not consistent enough passing. They've got good running backs, but they can't just straight up run like they've been able to do in past years. And part of that, I think, is due to the offensive line
Yeah.
issues too, which we haven't discussed yet. But I think it's a combination of things. But they're kind of so focused on Riley Leonard running the ball because you have to be that opens everything else up. And if they can't do that, I don't know that they have a plan, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we were seeing in the middle of the game. It puts a lot of pressure on the defense, who's been up to the task so far, but living dangerously, I would say.
Yeah. No, I mean, NIU is also an example where we weren't doing as many of those Riley Leonard QB runs, and then our offense got completely bogged down. But you are playing with fire a bit. I mean, Leonard is he's not a small QB at all. I mean, I think compared to like college quarterbacks, I guess you would say he's probably like above average size, but he's not the size of like a Ben Roethlisberger or someone who's just going to be extremely durable. So that is a risk that I think that's something that's maybe not discussed enough, is that if you have a quarterback who you're going to have to run a lot to have a effective offense, there is that injury risk, or there's that risk that he gets worn down a bit. And I don't know that that's necessarily the reason that we didn't call as many. It could have just been, I don't know. Just generally, we were just trying to be extremely conservative across the board. But yeah, I mean, I think that really slowed down our offense. And you mentioned, I'm going to talk about a few other aspects here that slowed down our offense in the middle of the game. You mentioned the offensive line. Our offensive line, once Louisville stepped up their aggressiveness, that was their big adjustment after earlier in the game. They were crowding the box more. They were selling out against the run, and our offensive line really struggled. So I would say our blocking grades, Pro Football Focus, they're not always perfect in terms of how I expect, in terms of like their grades matching up with what I'm seeing. But I think in this game they actually did. I would say their grades actually matched up pretty well. The offensive line, I really struggled in pass blocking. Fortunately, Riley Leonard was mobile. He was able to get out of a lot of negative yardage situations and kind of bail us out. So we actually had, it's interesting, Louisville actually only had a 13% havoc rate, which is pretty solid that we only gave up a 13% havoc rate. But I think that does not necessarily paint the right picture of how our offensive line performed. I think that they were letting a lot of pressure in it, and if we had a QB that was a little less mobile, they probably would have gotten more sacks, more tackles for loss, more disruption. So we were kind of fortunate there. So that hurt I think the conservative play calling. And we also just weren't, when someone sold out against the run, when this team sold out against the run, we weren't willing to make them pay for it. We either weren't willing or we weren't able. And it might be some combination of both. Again, we saw some signs from Riley Leonard that he was passing the ball a little bit better than he had in the past, but maybe not to the extent to where you felt that you could just make a team pay for forcing you to throw the ball. So I mentioned the success rate in the first quarter, which was really high. Well, it completely flipped in the second through fourth quarter. So 22%, 14%, 23%. That's the success rate in quarters 2 through 4. So whereas I mentioned a 45% success rate is really good, if you're in the 20s, that would be easily, I mean, I think you'd probably, if you had that over the course of the entire year, I think you'd probably be dead last. So we just were not able to move the ball at all. And we were particularly bad on passing downs, which is interesting. And I think, I mean, we mentioned this, a lot of this was the play calling, the conservative play calling, but we had a 0% success rate on passing downs in second and third quarters. That doesn't mean that we weren't completing passes. It's just, if we were completing passes, they were only for a couple yards. We weren't getting more than that. We weren't getting enough to stay ahead on schedule. So the data certainly matches exactly what we're saying here, that the offense slowed down pretty dramatically. And really, we got bailed out by our performance in the first quarter. It's just we were able to kind of jump to a good enough lead, and our defense played well enough to where we were able to hold on. And then, as you mentioned, Paul, thankfully Denbrock, it seemed like he had some plays kind of in his back pocket that he was saving for the end of the game, and those ended up working pretty well. I'd like to see that more consistently throughout the entire game. And the fact that we saw it at all does give me some hope that we'll be able to do that. But I am a little nervous that we will be susceptible to long lapses where we're just completely ineffective on offense.
Yeah, and I think it's good that they have the defense to rely on too, but I think some of the criticism that's been aimed at Riley Leonard is a little bit unfair, and the people calling to switch to Angeli, who certainly is a more polished passer, but I mean, even on that first drive when they were having success, they had to roll him out a bunch of times, just
Yeah.
knowing they weren't going to be able to block very well.
Yeah.
And I do think a lot of it has to do with the offensive line too. And Denbrock probably isn't able to use the full playbook like he would want to. And in the meantime, he's just kind of like hoping something will work or not trying to get Leonard killed out here. And I don't know how many cards he's holding in his hand, you know.
Yeah.
But he certainly had a couple of good ones for sure that he was saving for the right moment. But you're right, it was they were lucky they capitalized in the first quarter before Louisville could adjust because they needed all those points clearly, as we all saw.
Yeah. This is where I think having an offensive coordinator like Denbrock has been helpful. Certainly, I don't think the offense has matched what we were hoping for preseason, but he's demonstrated his value in moments like the end of the Louisville game, that drive, right? Also at Texas A&M, he called a really good drive, and that we would not. I would say last year we would not see that with Jared Parker, right? It would tend to be the opposite. So we're already seeing the benefits there. I think we're already seeing some signs of improvement in the passing game. I think the one and we're going to talk about injuries more. The one thing that kind of keeps just dinging us though is first to really take a step forward. There are a couple things we need to happen. One of them is obviously the passing game, which we mentioned, just the ability to throw it downfield. But the other is the offensive line needs to continue to improve, and we just keep getting banged up there. So we'll talk about that more in a bit. We have like a little not a segment, but like a little segment on injuries. But those have really been making it difficult for us to build cohesion on the offensive line. That being said, let's talk. I guess let's talk a little bit more about Riley Leonard because this has been the big topic for Notre Dame football basically since we lost to NIU. I thought, for me personally, I thought that this was his best performance thus far. Paul, I'm curious what you think about it.
I agree completely. That first drive, I think I even texted it in our the Memphis Boys group chat. It's the
Yeah,
best he looked all year throwing the ball at the beginning. He was sharp. He was
yeah,
completing the short passes, and then even later in the first quarter, I know the pass to Greathouse on the touchdown was wide open, but he didn't hesitate and he threw it, and it was effortless. I thought he looked great, and you mentioned his scrambling and extending ability, which is completely necessary. And then the running goes without saying. He's a freak athlete in that regard. But I thought he looked as good as I've seen him look um, in that game, and I would almost go as far as to say that I don't think they would have won the game if he didn't play well. If
yeah,
we get second game Riley Leonard, I think they might lose that game. To be honest,
yeah,
so I do think he's been banged up a couple different times. He certainly isn't perfect yet. I'm not arguing that he's Joe Montana or anything like that, but I think you've been able to see him get a little bit more comfortable because it's another thing to remember too is he missed what like half of last season, so
yeah,
he's coming back, getting his feet wet again. Immediately was thrown into a huge environment at A&M, so it's not going to be a perfect trajectory here, but I think he has improved so far, and he clearly looks more comfortable at least in the pocket a little bit. He's still a little squirrely, I would say, but he's you mentioned it to me a couple times on the side. He's clearly following his progressions a little bit more before just giving up and taking off. And I've seen progress. I do think if this team's actually going to keep getting better and make some noise, I think there's a little bit more progress to be made. But I think he looks much better than he did already
yeah.
since the first couple games.
Yeah, I totally agree. So last week, my mindset was he did enough. He did enough last week to hold on to his job. right? I saw enough signs. Our start was not great, right? But he did enough to hold on to the job for sure. And after that, thinking about it more, I think where my head was at was, well, okay, let's see how he does against a top 20 defense like Louisville. And Louisville, granted, their pass defense, that's a weaker area of their defense, but their defense is good enough to where they can actually, they can sell out. They can like sell out against certain areas, and they won't get exposed as much as other teams would. So they're a team that it'll make it more challenging, regardless of how the strengths and weaknesses stack up. They have enough pieces to be able to expose some of our weaknesses. So I thought this would be a really interesting test. I thought he answered it. Paul, some of the things that you're mentioning here, where he missed half of last season, he missed spring ball, a lot of the summer.
Yeah.
We had a bunch of new receivers come in, so there's an element where we may have not estimated properly how difficult it is to make all that come together cohesively. And I think for me, I wanted to see how he played in this game against a good defense, but I also wanted to see if we started to see signs that some cohesion was starting to build, that we were starting to see a more effective, balanced offense, more dynamic downfield passing game. And we were starting to see that. So I think if you're looking for a case that he will continue to get more comfortable, he'll continue to improve, that he will be able to hit some of that upside that we were thinking about when we brought him in as a transfer QB. I think this definitely gave us hope that that's on the table. I agree. I thought it was his best game so far. Pro Football Focus gave him a very strong grade, so they agreed with us. I don't know if it's actually technically. I think this is probably technically his highest grade on the season, but he graded out as a 74.4 on Pro Football Focus. And basically what that means is he graded out really well. So anything above 80 is elite. That's kind of where you're getting into high draft pick in the NFL. But a 74 against the top defense in the country, that's something to be really proud of. And I think what was really encouraging was that he got that grade in large part because of his passing. So his running certainly helped us out there, but this was largely driven by his ability to pass the ball. And Paul, as you mentioned, he got banged up too, so he was battling through that. I thought one stat that was really interesting to me is that his adjusted completion percentage. So this is basically if you adjust for drops, things like that. Basically, if they make a good throw and the receiver should have caught it, they'll adjust that into the completion percentage. His adjusted completion percentage was 91%. And granted, there were a lot of short throws that were very easy, but still, I think a 91% adjusted completion percentage is really impressive. And then, as I mentioned, the downfield passing game, he had 5 attempts where the depth of target was beyond 10 yards, which is the most that we've done that throughout this entire year. And he hit 3 of them. One of them was beyond 20 yards. The 2 passing touchdowns. We also mentioned he also got some production from him on the ground too. So yeah, you said not Joe Montana. He's not Joe Montana. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but we saw signs that there's more there, that there's upside to this offense. And I think that was really encouraging. Now, in terms of the negative, while we saw the upside, we're definitely not there yet. Like we saw some upside, but I think that whole stretch through the middle of the game has shown that we're not there yet. We're not able to make a team pay for just completely selling out. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to get there. We mentioned some of this is conservative play calling. He was banged up, but that doesn't change the fact that we weren't able to make them pay. So I think for me overall, I saw this as a step forward, but not a step to where we actually have arrived. You like to see the team trending in the right direction. And I think I definitely saw that today. Regardless of some of the mixed data points we got, I think overall overall the offense was moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I forget people don't have context for me on, I tend to be very passionate, but rather patient, I would say, in relation to most Notre Dame fans,
Yeah.
especially with coaching decisions and players and so on and so forth. But even like for context, prior to the turnaround against Miami, I believe, I don't know if I sent this to you. I for sure sent it to my dad, who also is a huge Notre Dame guy. I said, I'm giving him one more drive, and that's it. Granted, there may have been a couple of beers involved there, but for me to be saying, it's important context to
Yep.
remember that a week ago, like I was saying that, and I know people who listen to this don't know me, but like if I'm done with the quarterback, usually we're done with the
Yep.
quarterback. And to be clear, he turned it around last week too, obviously. But um, it's
Yep.
important context to remember that he's not going to like win the Heisman Trophy now all of a sudden. But I feel much better today than I did this time last week. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. No, I mean Miami of Ohio, and that was a rough start last week. I think I was pretty much in the same spot you were, Paul. I think I was thinking if he doesn't get it together immediately, we got to go with Angeli. And yeah, to his credit, he did. And then he took another step today. So it's great to see. I am curious. It's one of those things where Denbrock has done really well with quarterbacks that he has, mobile quarterbacks like Riley Leonard that he has for more than just 1 year. Like we even saw it with Jaden Daniels last year in his second season under Denbrock. Really made a leap forward. So it is a bit of a shame that we may not get that opportunity, but encouraging nonetheless to see some progress. So one other element of the offense I want to quickly go into is it's interesting that it was a pretty quiet day for the running backs. We only had 68 if you exclude Riley Leonard's yards, which he had about let's see, I wrote it down somewhere. He had 52 yards. So meaningful amount on the ground from Riley Leonard, but if you exclude that, all our other backs only had 68 yards. So it was a pretty quiet day for Price, Jeremiah Love. I don't think any of them got any rushing touchdowns. Love got that pass. He got that receiving touchdown on the screen. But other than that, it was pretty quiet. Any cause for concern for you on that, Paul?
I don't think. I mean, we've kind of covered it, but I think it had more to do with what Louisville was doing than with what we were doing. I did get a classic. My mom and my dad go to pretty much every game, and like usually my dad gets halftime texts. I got a classic. We're getting beat on both lines text from my dad at half, which by the way happens like pretty much every game every season. But and that's not untrue, but I do think it had more to do with Louisville's adjustments than any type of issues with what Notre Dame was doing. Because again, Leonard running
Yeah.
was mostly successful, and I do think that would have continued um, if he didn't get hurt. So I'm by no means concerned by that. I think it had more to do with what Louisville was doing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. I mean, and even then, like their yards per carry was still fine. 4.3 yards per carry. That's not bad by any means. It's just they have been so exceptional thus far that I think we've become used to that. And again, they just really sold out. So it makes sense that that's what we did. I think it was, as you said, it was kind of just a response. One other thing I wanted to call out here was I thought it was great to see Faison, finally get a little bit more production. He didn't light the world on fire, but he was productive, and it was good to see him looking a lot more like his old self. Great house. We mentioned that touchdown that he got. He had been a bit quiet this year, so it was good to see him get on the board. So overall, glad to see them make an impact. I think to close out the offense, just my final thought here is it was a mixed performance, but there were stretches where the offense looked the best it has all year. It wasn't able to do it consistently throughout the entire game. So I think that's the big key there for me. We got to be able to make teams pay for forcing us to pass the ball, and I think there's some signs that we may be able to eventually get there, at least more to more of an extent than we are right now. So for me, that's kind of the sign off note. Is this game gave us hope for the offense to improve. So with that, I'm going to shift it over to the other side of the ball to the defense. This is one that has not given us nearly as much stress this year. I think for this game, headline held another team under 30 points, and 14 of Louisville's 24 points that they scored were heavily aided by turnovers. When we actually gave them a traditional starting position, not off a turnover, they actually only scored one touchdown where they actually drove downfield and scored. So I would say a good performance from our defense. The key data point for me was havoc. So our defense generated a 25% havoc rate. So a quarter of the plays, Louisville's offense was getting sacked, tackled for loss, threw an interception, batted pass, fumble the ball, anything is like that. So anytime you have a rate like that, it is really, really tough for your offense to do anything effectively. So exceptional effort from our defense from that standpoint. And some other stats to go with that: 7 tackles for loss, 2 fumbles with 1 recovery. And then we had that interception from Watts where he returned it for, 34 yards. We unfortunately only got a field goal from it, but we had a high havoc rate. And we also, some of these havoc plays were also extremely impactful. And one element I've mentioned before with high havoc rates is that also makes it difficult for them to maintain a high success rate. Because if you're getting backed up, it's a higher threshold that you have to hit to be able to make something a successful play. So unsurprisingly, their success rate was 33%, which is well below where you would want to be able to stay on schedule. So I think from that standpoint, our defense was really effective. One area that we did not do as well in was actually third down. So Louisville, they weren't exceptional on third down, but they were more successful in those scenarios than in others. So they were 7 for 17. That's 41% conversion, and also way better than our 2 for 10 third down conversion. So that allowed them to stay on the field a bit longer. They were able to run a lot more plays than us, and actually that they had a pretty decisive not decisive, but they had a pretty large yardage advantage over us. And a lot of that was driven by their ability to convert on third down. So that was one area that we were weaker. But I will say on first and second down, we did a pretty good job of not allowing them to actually convert on first downs then. So we forced them into a lot of third downs, and then they just so happened to convert at a little bit of a higher rate. So that's kind of if we're being a little bit nitpicky. And then I would say the other area that they were able to that kind of kept them in the game a little bit more was their explosiveness. So their success rate was low, but when they converted, it was more likely that it was going to be for a big chunk of yards. So Shuck, he had 4 to 5. I think I counted 4 or 5 passes where it was like a 25-yard gain. They had a few runs that were 20 plus yards as well. So, and this was really the first time I can think of where we had given up a lot of chunks in the passing game. Fortunately, none of them were like 60-yard touchdowns or anything like that. I would say we gave up some big yardage plays, but it wasn't as bad as, say if you're playing like Ohio State and the receivers are just like, getting 60-yard touchdowns like every single drive. So that was the one area we were a little bit weaker. So it was the explosiveness. So it was the explosiveness and the third down conversion, but our havoc was so high. We were so disruptive, and overall we kept them from having too many successful plays that more than made up for what they were doing in terms of like their explosive play calling and the third down conversion. So I think overall good performance. I think that the great thing about the defense is they're a unit that I'm never really stressed about. Even when they're not having their best game, they're always playing well enough for us to win. And then many times they have games where they just completely shut down the other team. It takes a lot of pressure off our offense. So curious to hear what you think, Paul. What your impressions were from watching the defense.
Yeah, I think this is another, like we talked about a second ago, example of how I just watched the game and then you presented me with these advanced stats, and that was exactly what I felt like was happening. It did feel like every once in a while they would just rip off a run, and it's like,
Yep.
what is happening here? But then there would be some big play that would make up for it and push him back again. You could see Shuck kept looking like, oh, like how did that happen again? Like so, and then he'd make a pass, and then so it felt a little bit bend but not breaky to throw back to the 2010s.
Yeah.
I think that's fine. I know we're going to get to it in a second, but my main thing was there's so many guys that weren't able to play or were playing and then were
Yep.
out and they were in the tent again. And they just keep throwing guys out there, and the depth was pretty impressive in my opinion. But I thought they played well against a team who has some talent offensively. We saw that it was Lacey, the guy that came back, that
Yep.
made that crazy catch, and then was the other tall guy Brooks that had the touchdown,
Oh,
I think.
yeah.
Or
Is it, the transfer from Alabama? I think is that who you're thinking
yeah,
of?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
Brooks. I may have got the wrong name on that, but I mean they had receivers. The little running back was quick, and it's Shuck's a good quarterback. So and we know that, which we heard on the broadcast 800 times, that Braum, there's unity in the system because they're brothers and all that. Like, we know
Yeah.
they were going to have a plan. Um, but I trust the defense in a way that is unfamiliar to me as a Notre Dame fan for the vast majority of my rooting life. And I know Golden is good because we also heard on the broadcast 800 times he's going to dial up the blitzes. Like,
Yeah.
we know this, but I think that's responsible um, for a lot of the havoc numbers that you were given to. So I was pretty happy. I know they didn't look perfect, but like shout out specifically Moore, because he was thrown in there and all of a sudden had to play way more snaps than anybody expected him to have to play this season in a big game, and he
Yeah.
was awesome. Not perfect, but awesome. And I thought his running and punching the ball out play was probably the biggest play of the game too. So I was happy with the defense, and more importantly, I trust them.
Yeah.
This is an all-time vibes comment, but as a person who watches a lot of baseball, sometimes a pitcher comes out of the bullpen and you can see his face. You're like, this guy's about to give up a home run. You can just feel it.
Yeah.
When this defense is on the field, I feel like it's going to be okay, and I think that's exactly what you want from a defense.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's the amount of yeah. I mean, we gave up 24 points. To me, that seems like that's the most that our defense could give up. And again, a lot of that was aided by fumbles. When when we gave them a full field, they really weren't able to do a whole lot. These things that I mentioned about explosiveness or third down, and like look, their third down conversion rate wasn't even, it was like 40 something percent. So it's not like they were converting like 80% or anything like that. It's just compared to like their success rate overall, which was a lot lower, is a little bit better, and it was much better than ours. So I feel like that's the theme when I've been analyzing the defense this year, is when I try to find things, it's really just nitpicky. And they had some explosiveness, but you mentioned it really was kind of bend but don't break. They had, I don't know, they get like 25 yards here or there, but it wasn't like, Marvin Harrison for like 60 yards or something like that, right? And then that would happen, and then after a big play, then we tended to also have a big impact play on our end on defense to kind of push them back, or prevent them from really being able to capitalize on it. So I'm with you on it. It's just a unit that I have a ton of confidence in. I think right now in SP Plus they've moved up a little bit. They're number 7 right now. I think I'll be curious to see at the end of the year where our defense rates in the advanced stats. I think we have a pretty good shot at top 5, maybe even top 3, depending on how things go. And I think there's some other factors here that we hinted at that I think also give helpful context for the defensive performance today. So some people were nitpicking on the pass defense a little bit today. They're saying it wasn't at our typical elite level, and I think that's right. We gave up more. We certainly gave up more big passing plays than usual, but a lot of this is just purely because of injuries and opt outs. So Jaden Mickey, he opted out this week. He's redshirting. He's going to transfer. Obviously, like, wish him the best. I think he's been a great student athlete for Notre Dame. Has had gone through great tragedy in his time at Notre Dame, but seems like a good kid. And definitely don't blame him for opting out. But it definitely did hit our depth chart. And then Christian Gray was also hurt this year, who's emerged as a really strong defensive back for us this year. So Leonard Moore, you mentioned, true freshman. This was his first start, and I'm with you, Paul. I think he played really well overall. He had a couple of mistakes. He gave up, I think, like 60 yards passing, but he seemed to get better as the game went on. He had one mistake. There was one play where the punch out, right? That was a big gain. Clearly not our best defensive play, but we recovered. And then he had textbook punch out. I think you said it. I think you said it right. It was maybe the play of the game, right? Total momentum swing, gave us the ball back. So I think they battled. Also Benjamin Morrison, he was hurt for stretches of the game, so we had to move around guys like Rod Hurd and Clark to different positions. So they were playing a little bit out of position. So I think it makes sense that we weren't. This wasn't like our typical elite pass defense, but they were still good, and they certainly, I think, held Louisville, which is so far this year has had I would say a pretty effective passing attack. I think they were able to contain them pretty well, and I think if you're looking forward, I think as we get healthy, I think that they'll return back to form. And having someone like Leonard Moore have a game like this, that also just gives you more confidence to use him in the future. So I'm feeling pretty good about our pass defense. Look, wasn't our best performance, but I think moving forward, I think we're going to be more than fine. You mentioned the run defense, like there were some guys ripping off runs. I think to me that's a little bit more concerning. I was curious how, if you were looking at a per carry basis, how they were doing. Because the first stat I saw, it had sack totals, include like sack yardage and like that fumbled punt included, and that actually made their yards per carry like not look particularly impressive. But when you remove that, they're actually running for 6.1 yards per carry, which that's that's quite a bit, I think, in terms of a rushing attack. They had 190 yards total. So I think there have been times this year where our run defense has been the one area that I think at times we've looked a little bit softer. And it's just our pass defense has been so elite, like it hasn't really mattered. But this was the first time it seemed like someone was kind of capitalizing that a little bit more. Not to the extent to where they were able to put up a bunch of points, but it seemed like they maybe found something a little bit there. I am, however, hopeful that it does improve, though. We have Gabriel Rubio coming back. He's pretty good in run defense. Josh Burnham was banged up this game, but we should get him back. I think those two guys, that should help a bit. And look, part of this is also Al Golden's formations. They do tend to lend themselves to giving the offense some opportunities on the ground, right? It's a little bit more, hey, let's shut down the pass. Like, we're going to be aggressive with blitzes, but you do give a little bit on the run. So in light of all these considerations I mentioned, I'm not. I think the pass defense in particular, I'm feeling pretty good about. I think the run defense, as I mentioned, I'm a little more concerned about, but I do think there's. It seems like there could be some things here that are going to happen that'll make it look a little bit better as we move on. But I guess, yeah, moving on, we've hinted at this a few times already, but I feel like we've gotten to the point where we've had quite a few injuries and opt outs. And like I said, we've mentioned some of these injuries as we've talked about different position groups. But Paul, I'm curious to get your insight here on if we've gotten to the point to where it's starting to get a little concerning about the number of injuries that we have. Are we at the point where we're concerned, or is it more that we've kind of gotten to the point where we've eaten up our cushion, and we can't really afford too many more.
Yeah, I think part of this depends on what this report looks like when we get and they may be a little bit hesitant to admit stuff because of the bye week, which is perfectly timed, as everybody's pointed out. But you point out the pass defense. Like if, for example, like if Gray is hurt pretty bad, like that's a problem because now Mickey is gone, and like you said
Yeah,
too, I think of all the people who have ever opted out, like I understand his the most, but he was sitting there like shoot, like watching that game, like he would
yeah,
have helped out tremendously. Not that one game is going to change his life decision, but um, if Gray is not back soon, like that's an issue. Offensive line, I think we're already starting to see issues. Like was a little shaky already, but now it's even worse. We didn't talk about this yet. I don't think Kaiser was banged up at different points in that
yeah,
game, and I think that contributed to the run defense. Traore, which did not look very good on the replay, not one to speculate, but
yeah,
after he had just made a couple plays and has been awesome this year filling in, like if he's gone for the season, like that's a big problem. So I do think it's starting to accumulate a little bit, but if most of the ones that just happened this game are not bad and they get some guys back and offensively, obviously, like I don't think Leonard was hurt bad. They just said the wind got knocked out of him, but
yeah,
like I do think we're like a specific injury or two away from being in a bad place. I don't know that we're quite there yet. Like if Morrison had been hurt bad, for example, that would be a problem
yep,
with Mickey. Traore, I think, is the one that was the most troubling by far because that looked bad, and they already lost Botello. I think they need Kaiser to not get hurt too because he's too smart about formations and what's going on, and having him out there, they've referenced a million times, is like having another coach out there and
yeah,
all that. So I would say if next week was a game and it was a decent difficulty level game, I would be a lot more worried. But they've got 2 weeks off now. Put everybody in the tent, give them their little treatments and smoothies and whatever they need to do,
yeah,
and then and we'll see what it looks like when we get back to playing again. But I wouldn't say I'm in panic mode yet, but there
yeah,
were a couple of like, hey, do I need to like go to church in between like the first and second half comments that were being floated back and forth in my family group chat. So
yeah,
um, yeah, not great, but I think this is where having depth comes into play, and I think we've learned that they have good depth, which is thank goodness because they're getting it's getting bad at this point.
yeah. Fortunately, coming into this season, I guess before Jagasaw got hurt, it seemed like we were doing in pretty. It seemed like we were in pretty good shape from an injury standpoint. I feel like I wasn't hearing of many training camp injuries. So yeah, it's pretty, yeah, pretty disappointing how much that's flipped. I'm with you on it. I don't think we're quite at that point. Fortunately, I mentioned some guys coming back, right? So I think offensive line, I'll start there. Yeah, we've gotten banged up pretty badly there. Jagasaw's hurt. Ashton Craig. Uh, Billy Strouth is out. Although the good thing with him is that I think he should be back in a few weeks. So I think this bye week that's helpful. I don't know if he'll be. I don't know if he'll actually be back in 2 weeks when we play Stanford. But certainly we're getting closer to when he could return. He's our best offensive lineman. And Pendleton actually, it seemed like he maybe got hurt in this game. Although they didn't say anything after the game that suggested that it may be serious. So hopefully he's okay. I think one positive with our depth is on the offensive line, some of the guys who got passed up and didn't initially get the starting spot at the beginning of the year are guys who actually have experience. So someone like Pat Coogan, someone like Rocco Spindler. These are guys who have actually gotten some reps. So I think they stepped in, and the drop off is maybe not as much as you would expect. But even with that, I would say it's just all the changing of starters on the offensive line, right? We're not building cohesion like we would be able to. So, yeah, we mentioned we saw that a little bit this game. Like, definitely not a great performance from the offensive line. Louisville was taking advantage of it. Luckily, Harmon was able to kind of bail us out a bunch with his mobility. But yeah, here's to hoping that the offensive line gets healthy. I think, yeah, the other injury you called out with Traore, that one hurts because I think Patella he was playing really well, and when he went down, that really stung. But then Traore was really stepping up. He was looking like a breakout player, and we don't know what his injury is, but it looks serious, and it seemed like based on his body language, it seemed like he thought it was serious too. And I think after Traore, I think there is a pretty big drop off. Like we have talent, but it's guys who haven't really played a ton. So, maybe they'll be able to have some impressive pass rushes, but then they could have big mental lapses where, they just completely like miss an assignment or something like that. So, yeah, I think that's the one area where we have some drop off is on that on the defensive line at that position. I think the offensive line, once we get Shrouth back, I think we'll probably be all right. And then, yeah, I think this bye week comes at a good time. I think because some of these guys are banged up. Maybe they're not injured, but someone like Kaiser seems like he could probably use the bye week. We need him. You mentioned he's like the brain of the defense basically. And then someone like Riley Leonard, like he's not injured, but could definitely use it as well. So I think this bye week comes at a good time, and hopefully we can get some guys healthy and also just reset on offense and maybe see what's working, what's not working, things like that. But I guess kind of closing all this out on the Louisville game, I guess we can just discuss a little bit big picture. I think where we sit because I think that's important. Things were looking pretty dire after the NIU game. I would say definitely was not confident necessarily that we would win this game. I thought that we would, but for me, this one could have gone either way. I am pleased though that we were able to get this win. It was a top 15 win. Right now, we're one of the only teams in the country. We might be the only team in the country. We have two top 25 wins, right? So I think that really helps make up for that NIU game. I think if you look at our schedule, we should be favored in every game except for maybe USC. I guess we'll see what that actually looks like when we get there. But we control our own destiny. If we win out, we should make the playoff. I don't know that we're going to have a home playoff game, but we should at least get a shot at the postseason. And I think given the lows that we've already seen this season, I think that's a good spot to be in. So that's kind of where my head's at right now. I would say cautious optimism.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a week to week. Okay, just win the game and move on. I know that's how the whole season works, but win the game, move on, and then there will be like a 5 second moment where you remember that the loss to NIU happened,
Yeah.
and they should be undefeated right now, but it's still okay, but also kind of not really though, because I think I think it was on the Athletic. Their projection would be like a road game at Georgia for the first
Yeah.
game, and I
I
know
saw
they
that.
looked a little dicey yesterday, but that's not something I would be dying to sign up for with that stadium and an iffy passing game. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know if people stay healthy and the improvement keeps happening offensively. We know the defense is going to give them a chance to win. And
Yeah.
like you said, the schedule lines up pretty favorably. Like Florida State is much less scary of a game, obviously. Just off the top of my head, I will say, like Navy, I think is a scary. They always
Yeah.
are, but I think they're actually very good. This may be the local Memphis perspective, but that quarterback is awesome, and they're going to have a problem with him, I think. And notably, you're going to have to control the ball and hold the ball and score, which is not always a comfortable thing. But other than that, obviously USC will be a big one, but the path is still in front of them, and that's all we ask for, you know. So I don't think that has changed. They just need to get healthy and keep making improvements, and I'll feel okay about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I think yeah, offensively, like if you're just taking the optimistic case, it's that we don't really have any more injuries. The passing game improves. We get more cohesion on the offensive line. We start taking steps forward. We can make teams pay for selling out against the run, for instance. We eventually get to that point. And then for defense, I don't really know that you necessarily need. I think the positive case is we just kind of maintain the status quo essentially. You just hope that you don't have any critical injuries. And I think that's probably the case. I think as long as we don't have any critical injuries on defense, I think we're going to be playing at this top level for the most part. So I think that's a great place to be. Yeah, like you said, the schedule shapes. It's looking pretty favorable. Maybe Navy's better than we expected. Maybe Army honestly is a little bit better than we expected too. But yeah, I think overall good place to be in given where we were at after the NIU game. So We're number 10 in SP Plus right now. So the advanced stats say that we're a top 10 team. We're number 14 in the AP poll. So yeah, I think overall pleased with where we're at, and I think we can round out the Louisville segment with that note. So now moving to our last segment. This will be a short one. We wanted to talk about the Notre Dame NIL collective announcement that just happened this week. NIL is increasingly becoming a critical part of the college football game. Players who are top recruits, they're looking at a lot of factors in terms of how well they're going to be developed into an NFL prospect, how well they get along with the coaches, playing time. But increasingly, a big factor is how much they're actually just going to get paid. And what you tend to see, unsurprisingly, is the biggest schools, the Blue Bloods, those are the ones that can offer the most. And ND definitely has the potential to be really competitive in this area. We have I would say, a very engaged fan base and alum base. We have a lot of alums who are very generous benefactors, have financial resources maybe that you don't find with other schools. And interestingly, I would say that we actually have been pretty competitive, but there's always an opportunity to improve. We're certainly not at the top. I would say we're competitive, but we're not at the very, very top of the NIL space. And I don't know that Notre Dame ever actually will be. I don't know that that's something that we aspire to. I don't think we'll ever be Oregon or Ohio State, but I think we can put ourselves in a position where it's a net positive. And I think we're pretty close. But again, you can always improve. So moving on to that announcement, this was the NIL Collective. This was founded in 2022. Brady Quinn was a co-founder. This was the collective that really helped with payouts to Sam Hartman, Riley Leonard, a number of women's basketball players. So they look very effective. From everything I read, it sounds like we were competitive. There was a heavy service component, which I think is a good thing. But you weren't seeing that necessarily with other NIL collectives across the board. So, anyways, this collective fund is being replaced with Rally, which is a new one, and this is more of a straightforward, pure NIL collective. It's similar to the type of NIL collectives you'd see at Ohio State, you'd see at Oregon, and this is purely business focused. It's about getting the best business opportunities, the most money, frankly, into our players' hands, and I think this is a good thing. I think that focus on service is important, but I don't know that you necessarily have to tie that directly to NIL money. I think you can keep them separate. And what we tend to see is that a lot of Notre Dame players tend to be very active in the community anyway. I think you can. I think you can keep the NIL component completely separate and assume that many of these players are going to, go into the community, volunteer, things like that on their own. It's just kind of part of the Notre Dame mission. So I think overall this is a good thing. I think it's more competitive with the rest of college football. Again, I think we've already been competitive. I think this potentially takes us up another notch. Apparently, this also allows for more direct connection between fans and players. So it'll allow. I think it's like you could potentially raise more money from the fan base to help keep certain players satisfied, to help bring certain talent on board. So I think it's just for me. I th- I think a theme that we've seen since Marcus Freeman took over is that the administration has been, I think, more serious about winning competitively and building an infrastructure that's competitive with other top tier college football programs. We didn't always see that with Brian Kelly. I think Brian Kelly, that's something that he would push for, and it's part of the reason that he left, honestly. And then when Freeman came in, it seemed like it might have been a little bit of a wake up call. We don't do everything perfect, but I think when I read about things like this, it gives me hope that we're going to do everything that we can within the mission of the university to try to get back to that top level. Try to get back to the point to where we were running similarly to how we were running under Lou Holtz. So look, I think you could nitpick at the service component going away. I don't think at the end of the day that's going to make a huge difference into like what our players are doing in the community. I just think it's a good thing that we're continuing to strive to be as competitive as possible. I don't know, Paul, what your thoughts were when you kind of heard about this news.
Yeah, so I mentioned this to you on the side. I was out of the news cycle for some of this week because I
Yeah.
was I was sick. I was watching 15 movies on the couch, but I mean any type of investment in just energy wise in getting more directly involved in NIL is just honestly necessary at this point in time for any college. And like you said, fund. It seems like, and for full context, like I'm mostly just I watch the games and like anything that's in kind of like the marketing or the business sphere, like Mike is my first text for asking what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give like a well-reasoned viewpoint here by any means, but it seems like you mentioned, like fun sort of served its purpose, and rally is going to be getting more directly at just cutting at what is going on here. And like you said, like Notre Dame football players are going to be doing service in their community. Like if they're actually recruiting guys that they want to be Notre Dame guys, then those are guys who are going to get involved in the community in South Bend anyway. Um, and that may even be more of a genuine involvement because there's no direct tie to the NIL, and there's questions of why they're there. It's probably because they just want to do it, you know. So um, anyway, my takeaway is pretty straightforward. More direct involvement in NIL, which it seems like this is what this is kind of it's just a necessity in 2024. So
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing, but I'm by no means well read on this. I'm just kind of trusting Mike here, but he tends
I
to know more
completely
stuff on
misled you.
this.
I pulled out a lot of just this is all just fake information I gave you. Nothing actually happened. I just wanted to get your hypothetical take on the record. Yeah, dude, I actually think that's a really good point that you raised about it's like not having money tied to service actually maybe makes more sense because it's more genuine. That does actually seem more in line with what the Catholic mission of the university would be. Uh, so I think if you're looking at reasons to not be upset about service going away, I think that's a big one. It's more more genuinely out of like empathy, more genuinely out of wanting to do good for the community. So I think that's positive. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, look, I don't know if this is going to be a needle mover necessarily, but it just shows that we're focused on doing everything that we can. And there, I feel like there are a lot of other things the university is doing right now. We have like we have a new football facility that they're working on that we're going to break ground in the next couple of years. So it just seems like with the we've had some turnover in the administration. We have a new president. We have a new athletic director. And it seems like they are very focused on returning Notre Dame to the top of the college football landscape, and also just having the rest of our athletic programs doing well too. Well, we didn't even talk about men's basketball at all this week, but this was like a massive week for Notre Dame's men's basketball. We got a 5-star recruit. I think we got another 4-star. I think depending on recruiting services, we're number one in the country right now. So this isn't a college basketball podcast, but it's encouraging to see stuff like this happen across the board for Notre Dame athletics.
Yeah, and again, I know some people don't know me. Basketball and baseball are probably my two favorite sports, but Notre Dame, so you got to care about football. But I mean, Shrewsbury, in terms of he's kind of like a like Freeman, what I hope Freeman to be like 5 years down the road, so to speak.
Yeah,
Um, and clearly, the way that Freeman and Shrewsbury are directing this, and the universities behind them. And I think the new AD Bavak was on board. Like they've got a really good plan. Because I've also been following Notre Dame basketball pretty much my entire life, and nothing like this has ever happened before. I promise you. Like my dad still talks about when they got Chris Thomas, and that was like 25 years ago or however long ago that was, and that was a huge deal and still is. So
yeah,
things are looking up for basketball too. Again, I know, not a
yeah,
basketball podcast, but I'm
yeah,
excited to watch that team this year and
yeah.
next year.
We didn't even have to hire Penny Hardaway, so
Yeah,
it's just
we'll leave out the Penny Hardaway slander, but
yeah,
rough times for the old Tigers lately here in Memphis. So
yep. All right, well, yeah, Paul, thank you for coming on the podcast. I've been wanting to have you come on for a while. I guess we don't have that many opportunities. Usually, the opportunities for guest spots are just when Brett and I are out of town. But I was thinking whenever this happened again, you would be a good person to have on. Just because we've been such good friends for a long time. You've been such a huge Notre Dame fan your entire life. So thank you for coming on. It was great discussing this game, other aspects of the season, Notre Dame basketball for a little bit, even Penny Hardaway. So yeah, just thank you again for coming on. It was a good time.
anytime, this was fun, and it's honestly like we were sitting on Xbox talking to each other anyway. So
Yeah,
anytime you need a fill in, just give me a call.
yeah, yeah. Pretty much might be the same conversation we would have on Xbox, except we wouldn't have one of our buddies, Hank, just yelling out slander about various football
Yeah.
players and programs.
Although
um,
Hank's happy about the Vols right now. The Vols
that's
are
true.
looking pretty good. So
Yeah. Cool. All right. So with that, gonna sign off on this episode. Gyrish beat bye week.
yeah, Irish beat injuries and bye week.
Absolutely.